Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author, and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing The Soul Proprietor by Jennifer Rainey. This is the fourth book in the Lovelace and Wick series. It is a queer paranormal fantasy. The description says, when Viola Acheson last saw Iago Wick, she promised that if ever they met again, she would destroy him. Imagine his dismay one autumn afternoon upon finding her waiting for him in his parlor. But Acheson has different plans these days. Caught in a battle to save her soul, she swiftly enlists the help of Iago and his husband Dante Lovelace, in a plot that's part deal with the devil, part supernatural heist. Madame Amelia Sly is a wicked spiritualist with one of the largest collections of stolen supernatural relics around, including an ancient scroll that's the key to Viola Acheson's salvation. It's up to Iago, Dante, and the Achesons to execute their plot through the art of magic and a little play acting. But Madame Sly has her eyes on her own desired treasure, and she's not about to step aside without a fight, one which could bring deadly consequences. Join Messrs. Lovelace and Wick in the final installment of the Lovelace and Wick series, a tale of daring deception, magical adventure, and companionship against all odds. Still 4 stars. I kind of expected to dislike this book a little more. I didn't particularly like Viola. She was a fine antagonist in the first book, but once she became an ally, I mostly just found her disagreeable. So an entire plot centering around her didn't seem promising. But ultimately I enjoyed it. In fact, I still liked this plot better than the second book. This book suffered a little of the same problem from the previous entry. Rainey once again introduces a character that she wants us to think is terrifying and powerful, only to completely undermine him and make him useless. So useless, in fact, that he doesn't merit a mention in the description despite being the major catalyst for the plot. There's also a background plot that involves Iago getting into trouble with the demonic council that felt poorly explained and extremely tedious. All the same, the main plot surrounding Madame Sly and the heist is pretty well put together, with only 1 or 2 places where I thought it faltered a bit. This is another one where I don't feel like there's that much to say about it, especially without spoilers, so we'll move on to that. If you don't like spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's talk details. So, Viola's problem is that she's being chased by the Dullahan. The Dullahan collects the souls of anyone whose name appears on his scroll, and Viola's time is up. So she signs Iago's book because the Dullahan can't break a demon deal. Iago isn't supposed to make deals anymore since he quit, so he gets into trouble with the Demon Council in his area. I don't fully understand how or why the Demon Council operates more or less separately from Lucifer, and Rainey fails to give a satisfying explanation despite having Iago ask about it point blank. He's been pardoned by Lucifer, and they still get the soul if Viola dies, so I don't know why they're upset about it, but they are. Before the council can exorcise Iago and send him back to hell, the Dullahan shows up. The Dullahan is supposedly very old and powerful, so the Demon Council are afraid of him, and they leave Iago to his mercy. But the Dullahan isn't there to hurt Iago. He's pissed that he snatched up Viola's soul, but only moments after he discovered what they'd done, a witch popped up to steal his scroll. So now he wants Iago to get it back for him, and then he'll leave Viola alone. So we're told that the Dullahan is a big scary spirit that has demons quaking in their boots, but he's overpowered both by Viola's cleverness and some random witch. It makes it hard to see him as any kind of threat. Worse still, we learn a little later that the witch doesn't even steal it for a good reason. She has a collection of supernatural curiosities that she puts on display, and she wanted the Dullahan's scroll as a minor detail for a larger piece depicting a fake specter of death. So he hasn't just been bested by a witch, he's been bested by a witch for virtually no reason. The Council of Demons, incidentally, aren't satisfied at having to leave Iago to the Dullahan, so the local overseer decides to have the current tempter in his employ spy on Iago so he can screw him over later. He doesn't like Iago being in his territory, so he's determined to be rid of him. This has very little impact on the plot until the very last minute, so it mostly just wastes time until it can matter, and then wastes a little more time in the wrap-up. The witch in question is actually a money-hungry necromancer. She's got her sideshow of various paranormal trinkets and a pretty good reputation, but she wants something more. Turns out, she wants to get her hands on a demon's book of names so she can summon souls from hell as revenants. With a little clever lying, she'll make it look like she's bringing the dead back to life, which will make her rich and famous. She's already got one such revenant in her employ, her cousin, to protect her collection. This revenant, Trudy, is another place where I feel like the story faltered a bit. Trudy apparently sold her soul because she was mad at her mother for pissing away her inheritance. So she contracted with a demon to kill her mother and then got executed because she was the only real suspect. Oops. But she made friends in hell, somehow, and now she wants her cousin, Madame Sly, to summon their souls. When it becomes abundantly clear that Sly has no intention of doing that, she starts to turn against her, eventually letting Iago and friends have free run of the exhibition, and then at the very end, killing her cousin. I didn't really have a problem with Trudy up until that last bit, but I'm trying to keep this somewhat in order, so I'll talk about that a bit more later. Like I said, most of the plot is actually pretty decent. Mostly the problems I had were with execution. For example, Dante has been trying to figure out a way to protect him and Iago from exorcism, since that is more or less the only threat to them now. He manages to figure it out just in time, which is fine. Madame Sly eventually tries to exorcise them with a special blade she received from the demon overseer. The protection works, obviously, but we find out he drew the necessary sigil on the inner sole of their shoes. I kind of expected it to be somewhere on their bodies, and I don't really understand why it worked in their shoes. It kind of irritated me. The exhibition, incidentally, is being held in the house of the first person we saw Iago tempt in the first book, a Mr. Courtwright. Having stolen Iago's book, Sly murders one of the locals and then resurrects him in front of everyone with Courtwright's soul. This feels like it should matter, but it really doesn't. We get a merry chase in which the Dullahan shows up to chauffeur the heroes to the final confrontation and then do nothing else. And then we're in the climactic final battle. Mostly, this was fine. But earlier, just before Sly stabbed the demons, Trudy revealed that she'd had enough of Sly and was sent back to hell. So when Sly summons Courtwright's soul, Trudy tags along and tries to kill her. She's unsuccessful because she's a bodiless spirit, but Viola sees her and recognizes her rage and power. So a large part of the final plan involves getting Trudy a body so that she can kill Sly. Technically, this is fine. It obeys the rules of the story, follows from the events preceding it, and gets the job done. But Trudy is introduced in this book and gets very little development overall, so it's a little disappointing that she's the one who actually saves the day, rather than any of our heroes. Also, it didn't occur to me while reading, but I realized earlier that there is a glaring flaw in the whole plot. When Iago tells Dante that Sly wants his book, Dante explains that to create a revenant you need something intimately connected to their soul. Iago's book of names counts, but I would think the Dullahan's scroll would work by the same logic. So why then does Madame Sly steal the scroll and then do nothing with it? On the plus side, after 30 years, Iago finally realizes that he's friends with Viola, and he should, act like it. So once everything is neatly wrapped up, they finally decide to pull their heads out of their asses and just be friends. And I really appreciate that because it had frustrated me at the end of the second book when they separated as if the only reason to keep in contact was because of some ridiculous bargain they made. Okay, that's all I have to say about the Soul Proprietor, but since this is the last book, I'll go over some series thoughts. In general, I really do like this series. The characters are good and the plots are mostly decent, but it definitely has some recurring issues as well as some big overarching ones. I've said already that both the Army of Angels and the Soul Proprietor have a problem of introducing characters that are supposedly very powerful and terrifying and then completely undermining them. And both Binding Dante Lovelace and The Army of Angels spent a lot of time introducing characters that had little to no impact on the plot. Both of these are problems that I think could have been fixed with a little revision. I also generally disliked the humor in these books. This is very much a personal taste issue, but for the most part I thought the things that I assume were supposed to be jokes fell flat and often were tonally dissonant with the rest of the book. The Vampire Queen and her boyfriend in The Army of Angels are a pretty good example of this. Whenever Eustacia was on the page, it felt like I was supposed to be laughing, but the story is about angels being enslaved and killed, so being asked to laugh at one of the primary characters felt extremely jarring. My biggest problem is that I feel like this series has some major lore issues. For starters, despite beginning with a book about Iago trying to tempt sinners to hell, the series is very unclear about what constitutes a hell-worthy sin. The Order of the Scarab are responsible for killing multiple people, at least one of whom was apparently completely innocent, but because they contracted out those murders, it doesn't count. We know suicide is also not an unforgivable sin. It shouldn't be, but usually is in Christian theology. Because Gloria finds out where Iago is being held at the end of the first book by coming to collect a man who killed himself nearby. Witchcraft also doesn't count, though binding a demon with witchcraft does. Demons supposedly predate Lucifer, but they were all too happy to bow down to him when he arrived, so much so that they'll screw each other over on his orders. But only on his orders, because apparently trying to get Iago exorcised in the Soul Proprietor was bad form. Purgatory exists, and demons used to keep a prison there and send demons there to test their mettle, but they stopped eventually. There don't appear to be souls in Purgatory, just monsters. Angels have never been to Purgatory. Purgatory is sentient, despite no evidence that either heaven or hell are. Also, the Dullahan exists entirely separate from the Christian pantheon, and he also collects souls as dictated by some mysterious force. Most of these could be really interesting concepts, but because Rainey never actually engages with them, they just become confusing background noise. That might be fine, except that the confusing jumble of conflicting and half-fleshed-out ideas makes me suspect that Rainey failed to consider them entirely and just added things in that she thought would be fun. Overall, they are far from perfect reads, but I still mostly enjoyed them. I thought book 1 was the best, and book 2 was the worst. I'm not necessarily going to say I recommend the series. I think there is a very particular audience for it, but I couldn't begin to say what kind of audience that is. It doesn't help that I doubt there is a library on the planet that has a copy of these, so anyone wanting to give them a shot has to buy them. On the bright side, they're pretty cheap. So I guess, if they sound at all up your alley, and you've got a couple of bucks to spend, give them a go. You might like them too. That's all I have to say. If you liked this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye.